Понеділок, вечір. Ви знаєте, ми звикли говорити понеділок – день важкий. В країні війна, тож кожен день понеділок. Я залишаюсь тут, залишаюсь у Києві, на Банковій, не ховаючись і нікого не боюсь, стільки, скільки потрібно, щоб перемогти у цій нашій вітчизняній війні.
This is my first video update coming to you from a very rainy election Sunday here in Nicosia, Cyprus. Today we have presidential elections here. The first round of voting is today. And once we get down to our top two candidates, we will have a runoff second round of voting that will take place. So it'll be an interesting news day here from Cyprus. Let's now talk about the interview that former Israeli Prime Minister Bennett gave to this TV channel in Israel, a 5-hour-long interview that appeared on YouTube yesterday evening. And the former Israeli Prime Minister, he said some very, very interesting things with regards to Russia, Ukraine, Putin, Zelensky. And I'm going to read you an article from the Jerusalem Post. It's not a long article, but the Jerusalem Post covers what I believe to be one of the most interesting segments of this 5-hour-long interview, the most interesting segment of this 5-hour-long interview, which deals with Zelensky's panic that Putin was going to assassinate him, and how the Israeli Prime Minister, the former Israeli Prime Minister, went to Moscow in early March of 2022 to not only mediate some sort of peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, but to secure Putin's word that the Russian president was not going to assassinate Zelensky. This is a fantastic, incredible revelation from the former Israeli Prime Minister. And the title from the Jerusalem Post is, "Putin assured me he wouldn't kill Zelensky," Bennett recalls. Now, before I read you this article, keep in mind that Zelensky, probably around the March-April timeframe, was talking a whole lot of smack about Putin and Russia. He was saying that he's not afraid of Putin, he's not afraid of Russia. He was saying that the Russians want to assassinate him. But here I am in Kiev, I'm not afraid. I'm on the streets of Kiev. And then he also started to say stuff like Putin is a coward and he's hiding in a bunker underneath the Kremlin. Remember all of that? Remember when he was talking that smack? Well, keep that in mind as I read you this article from the Jerusalem Post, which was covering this 5-hour-long interview with the former prime minister. Russian President Vladimir Putin promised not to assassinate his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, when he met with the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett last year in the early days of the war. "Do you intend to kill Zelensky?" Bennett recalled asking Putin during an almost 5-hour interview he gave to Israel's Channel 12 that was posted on YouTube on Saturday night. In that conversation, he recounted details from his well-known trip to Moscow on Shabbat in early March 2022 in an attempt to help broker a peace deal between the two sides. While Bennett was not able to help end the hostilities, he was able to secure a pledge from Putin not to kill Zelensky, who at the time was hiding in a secret bunker to prevent such an assassination. Putin assured Bennett, "I'm not going to kill Zelensky." Bennett replied, "I need to understand that you are giving me your word that you will not kill Zelensky," and Putin again promised not to do so. Bennett called Zelensky while he was still in Moscow on his way to the airport from the Kremlin to tell him that he was not under a death threat. "Are you sure?" Zelensky asked. 100%, Bennett replied. Within hours, Zelensky had returned to his office and made a video explaining that he was not afraid, Bennett said. So you understand what what happened there. Basically, basically, once Zelensky found out that Bennett had secured his safety because he was cowering in a bunker in Kiev, Zelensky called up his producers and his director, got in front of his green screen, and made a video saying that Russia is out to assassinate me, but here I am on the streets of Kiev. I'm not afraid of Putin and Russia. All the while, until he got those assurances, Zelensky was cowering in his bunker, absolutely frightened that that Putin was going to take him out. Here we understand who Zelensky really is. Here we understand who Zelensky really is. The actor Zelensky. This is the actor Zelensky. And I think Bennett understood that as well. No doubt about it. It's starting to come down hard now. So, yeah, that's the real Zelensky, everybody. Always projecting, afraid, hiding in a bunker, and projecting. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't Putin that was hiding in a bunker like Zelensky claimed. It was Zelensky that was hiding in the bunker. But once Zelensky found out that he was safe, well, then he came out and said, I'm the man. I'm the man, and I'll take you on, Putin. Name the time, name the place, here I am. That was pretty much Zelensky's statement. And Zelensky was so afraid, according to Bennett, he was so afraid about what Putin was going to do to him that he couldn't wait for Bennett to get back to Israel. Bennett had to call him from Moscow after the meeting with Putin while he was driving to the airport. That's how worried Zelensky was. An incredible revelation from the former Israeli prime minister. Bennett also said that Zelensky called him and asked to contact Putin. It was Zelensky that called up Bennett and wanted Bennett to contact Putin. At that time, Zelensky was sure that his days were numbered and that he was going to be destroyed. It was not difficult to remove him, said Bennett. Bennett also revealed in the interview that while he was mediating while he was trying to mediate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, it was Western countries that interrupted his mediation. It wasn't Russia that backed out of the mediation for a peace deal, but it was Western countries that spoiled any chance for peace between Russia and Ukraine. This was back in early March. And I think this makes sense because then you had the peace deal that came very close to being signed that Turkey was mediating towards the end of March, April, where Boris Johnson then flew to Kiev and ruined that peace deal. So those are the statements from Bennett. An incredible interview, an incredible revelation. No wonder the EU and all of these Hollywood elites, all these Hollywood actors, no wonder they like Zelensky so much. He's just playing a role. He's playing the tough guy. Deep inside, he is absolutely frightened. Let's move on and let's talk about, what should we talk about? Since we're on the subject of Ukraine, we have this article from The Hill, which is citing a report from the New York Times, which claims that Russia has suffered 200,000 casualties. The title from The Hill says, officials say Russian troops killed, wounded in Ukraine approaching 200,000. And according to the New York Times, from this report from the New York Times, their sources for coming up with this 200,000 number includes information from government officials. Doesn't say which government. I would imagine the Ministry of Defense from Ukraine, as well as the Pentagon and perhaps the UK Ministry of Defense. It cites its sources as social media and various other video and media sources and media accounts. And that is how it came to this 200,000 number of casualties for the Russian military. The one source that the New York Times did not bother to check up with is the Russian military. Not that the Russians would give the number, but at least the New York Times could have put something in there, or the Hill could have put something in there like, we tried to contact the Russian Ministry of Defense to get their casualty numbers, but they refused to comment. But I have a hunch that most of these figures are coming from think tanks and NGOs like the Institute of the Study of War, which is run by, I believe, Victoria Nuland's sister-in-law, if I'm not mistaken. But I believe that most of this information is coming from Ukraine and the Institute of the Study of War. Back in 2014, all of the information about the first conflict between Donbass and Ukraine, all of the information that the collective West was getting was coming exclusively from the Ukraine government. And so it's really no different in this conflict either. Most of the information that is being reported on from the collective West is coming from sources in the Ukraine government. So their number is 200,000, and they say that that Russia is suffering heavy casualties as they send untrained fresh recruits to fight in Bakhmut, and convicts from the Wagner group to fight in Bakhmut, and the Ukraine artillery is grinding them down, which is a very interesting form of projection in this instance, because everyone knows, including from Ukraine media reports, that Russia absolutely has the advantage when it comes to artillery, and it is the Russian artillery that is grinding down the untrained Ukraine forces that are being sent into Bakhmut. And we know that the Ukraine is sending untrained recruits to Bakhmut because we have hundreds of videos showing Ukraine officials grabbing military-aged and sometimes not military-aged Ukraine citizens, men, off of the streets and putting them into police cars to send them to the front lines. We have reports coming from Transcarpathia and from the Hungarian government complaining that the Zelensky regime is grabbing ethnic Hungarians and Ukrainian citizens living in the Transcarpathia region at a disproportionate rate, and they are grabbing them and sending them to the front lines in Bakhmut. And we even have The Guardian, who came out with an article just yesterday and said that Ukraine officials are grabbing men up off the streets, untrained, and sending them to the front line. So we have multiple sources, including The Guardian itself, who have confirmed that it is the Zelensky regime that is sending untrained, fresh recruits into the Russian artillery. And we know the Russian artillery is at a huge advantage over Ukraine. Even the Ukraine military, I believe Zelensky, during his interview with The Economist, even said that Russia has an advantage from the standpoint of artillery. I believe that advantage is something like 8-1 or 10-1, something like that. So I'm not exactly sure where the New York Times is coming up with their narrative in this article. But if that is the case, and let's just say we go by this 200,000 number, well then, if the Russians have an 8-1 advantage over Ukraine with regards to artillery, then can we say that Ukraine has suffered 1.6 million casualties? I mean, is that a fair assumption? And how come the New York Times isn't probing the Ukraine military to find out their casualty numbers? How come it's always the Russian casualty numbers that the New York Times is reporting on? It's never the Ukraine casualty numbers. Those numbers, for all intensive purposes, according to the collective West, are zero. They'll have you believe that those numbers are zero casualties, because they never report on it The last report we have of Ukraine casualties is when Ursula von der Crazy 3 months ago gave her speech in Brussels, and she said 100,000 Ukraine officers. She said officers. Those were the casualty numbers that Van der Crazy said in that speech in Brussels. What is going on in Bakhmut right now at the moment? The last report is that Wagner has moved closer into the city of Bakhmut from the north, so they are securing the north, and they now control 3 sides of all of Bakhmut, and there's only one road leading into Bakhmut, and only one side is open, and that is the side where Zelensky continues to feed in the recruits that he's grabbing up off of the streets and throwing them into Bakhmut, so they can continue to hold the city. Because Zelensky said the other day in his press conference at the EU-Ukraine summit in Kiev, he said that Ukraine will not retreat from any territory. So Zelensky's plan is to continue to feed in people into Bakhmut, feed them right into the Russian artillery. And the narrative, because a lot of people, including myself, everyone wonders, why is Zelensky doing this? Why doesn't he just retreat? Why doesn't he just leave Bakhmut? Because it's already essentially lost. Well, the narrative from Ukraine media, and this is their narrative, and some people may think this is coping, but I'm just giving you what their narrative is, how they're rationalizing this strategy from Zelensky. According to a lot of Ukraine media sources, they say that this is all part of Zelensky's plan, which is to hold on to Bakhmut for as long as they can until Ukraine can bring in its well-trained, very experienced fighting forces, a lot of which are being trained by NATO in the West, along with all of their new NATO toys and tanks and weapons, and bring them into the front lines to then push back the Russians. So, according to various sources in Ukraine, this is all part of Zelensky's plan to continue to hold on to Bakhmut so that the Ukraine military can bring in this force that they're amassing, a well-trained fighting force with brand new weapons that they are amassing, and bringing them into the battle, which will be sometime in the spring. They'll be ready sometime in the spring, and then that's when they can push the Russians back and then launch their own counteroffensive all the way to Crimea. That is the narrative. Call it a cope. That's what they're saying. That's how they're rationalizing this Bakhmut strategy from Zelensky. Joseph Borrell, Jungle Joseph, he said the other day in a statement, the EU foreign policy chief, he said that EU countries have never considered and are not considering the possibility of sending their military to Ukraine to participate in the conflict. Maria Zakharova said, I have big doubts about the adequacy of the Gardiner Borrell. The Gardiner Borrell, Jungle Joseph. The military of the EU member states have long been sent to Ukraine, and in the form of instructors, and in the form of special services, and in the form of mercenaries. Moreover, their dispatch began long before 2022. That is what Maria Zakharova said in response to Joseph Borrell's comments, Jungle Joseph's comments, that the EU has no plans, never have, never will they send EU member state military to fight in Ukraine. That is according to Borrell. And so let's do a clown world, and we will wrap this video up from a very rainy Nicosia. And in this clown world, we have to talk about another prank from Vovan and Lexus. I always confuse their names. I always want to say Lovan and Vexus. from Vovan and Lexus. And they pulled off another prank a couple of days ago, and their target this time was Chief Neocon John Bolton. And Vovan and Lexus, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Vovan. I don't know if it was Lexus. But one of them pretended to be former Ukraine President Chocolate King Petro Poroshenko. And he called up John Bolton, and what an interesting conversation those two men had. Boy, did John Bolton really run his mouth. Search it on Twitter, search it on Telegram. There's all kinds of great sound bites from that prank call. But one of the most interesting comments from Bolton was this. He said, "The way you put Putin under political pressure in Moscow is to cause the collapse of Russian forces in Ukraine. That's what could drive him from office." Regime change. It always was about regime change. It still remains about regime change for the neocons. That's what it always was about. That's what this conflict still is about. And you're hearing it from one of the chief neocons himself, who thought he was speaking to the former Ukrainian president, Poroshenko. So for John Bolton, the plan is to inflict damage onto Moscow. Bolton even says that Ukraine should absolutely attack Russian territory because the end goal is to create some sort of panic, some sort of destabilization in the Kremlin where you can then remove Putin. That is the plan, according to John Bolton. Now, the funniest part about this prank call, what I consider to be the funniest part about this prank call, is that Vovan or Alexis, whoever decided to be Poroshenko in this instance, they don't even try to impersonate the Chocolate King, the former Ukraine president. They don't come up with a different voice. They don't try to mimic Poroshenko. They're just kind of talking in their natural voice. You know, the English with a Russian accent. They're not even trying to impersonate Poroshenko. And still, John Bolton believes that it's Poroshenko. I find it incredible that this is Bolton, who claims to be this foreign policy, international relations super expert, right? This is the super expert when it comes to foreign policy for the neocons in the United States. And he doesn't smell a prank. He doesn't know. He doesn't recognize Poroshenko's voice. He doesn't have a little bit of a suspicion that maybe I'm being pranked here. He actually believed it was Poroshenko. And I'm telling you, Vovan and Lexis, they're not even trying. They're not impersonating Poroshenko like I try to impersonate Trudeau or Schultz. They're not trying at all. They're just speaking in their natural voice. But Bolton, he just hears a Russian accent. They say it's Poroshenko. And in his ignorance, he believes it. They don't even try. Vovan and Lexis, they don't even try. That was what I thought. The funny part about this prank, in my opinion, was that Bolton actually fell for it. I mean, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. They hear the Russian accent, and then you can tell them you're anybody. I'm Putin. I'm Poroshenko. I'm Zelensky. I'm whoever. As long as it's you can say I'm Dostoevsky, and they'll believe you. I'm Lenin. I'm Lenin. Oh, it's Lenin? Oh, he has a Russian accent. He's speaking English with a Russian accent. It must be Lenin. Unbelievable. Anyway, search for the video. You'll find it. Bolton says all kinds of crazy stuff in it. But that's the clown world for today. I'm going to wrap up this video. And let's see. We are on Locals, the Duran.locals.com. We are on Rockfin, Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.